The sounds echoing from the Vatican chambers at midnight were unlike anything the Swiss guards had ever heard. This wasn't the familiar rhythm of prayer or politics that usually filled these sacred halls. No, what pierced through the marble corridors on that October evening in 1503 was something far more primal, something that would make even the most battle-hardened soldier avert their eyes and pretend they heard nothing at all. But behind those ornate doors, history was being written in the most scandalous way imaginable. What unfolded that night would become the template for power plays that echoed through European courts for centuries. This is the story of how one woman turned her body into the most dangerous political weapon the Renaissance had ever seen, and how a single night of witnessed passion changed the course of Italian politics forever. You think you know about political marriages in the Renaissance. You think you understand how power really worked behind those gilded palace walls. By the end of this video, everything you believed about love, politics, and survival in medieval Europe will be shattered. Because what I'm about to reveal isn't just history. It's a masterclass in how sexuality became the ultimate currency of power. If your pulse is already quickening from this glimpse into history's most forbidden chambers, hit that like button. And in the comments, tell me which Renaissance figure's darkest secrets you want exposed next. The most requested name will become our next investigation. Subscribe and ring that notification bell, because these truths are only shared with those brave enough to handle them. The year was 1503, and the Borgia family had reached the pinnacle of their influence. Pope Alexander VI ruled not just the Catholic Church, but controlled vast territories across central Italy. His children had become living weapons in his political arsenal, and none more so than his daughter Lucrezia. At 23, she had already survived 2 marriages that ended in murder, an annulment, each one teaching her brutal lessons about survival in a world where women were currency and weakness meant death. But Lucrezia was no longer the naive girl who had been traded like livestock between powerful families. She had evolved into something far more dangerous, a woman who understood that in a world designed to destroy her, she would have to become the destroyer instead. Her weapon of choice wasn't poison or daggers, though rumors swirled about both. Her weapon was something far more subtle and infinitely more powerful, the strategic deployment of her own sexuality. The political landscape of Renaissance Italy was a deadly chess game where every marriage was a military alliance and every bedroom was a battlefield. The great houses of Florence, Venice, Naples, and the Papal States maintained their power through a complex web of unions that could make or break entire dynasties overnight. In this environment, the consummation of marriage wasn't just a private matter between husband and wife. It was a public performance that required witnesses, documentation, and proof that would stand up to the scrutiny of rival courts, looking for any excuse to declare a union invalid. This is where our story takes its most shocking turn. Because what happened in those Vatican chambers wasn't just a wedding night. It was a carefully orchestrated political theatre where every moan, every gasp, every moment of intimacy was recorded by hidden scribes as evidence of legitimacy. The papal apartments had been transformed into something unprecedented, a stage where sexuality itself would determine the fate of nations. The bride on this particular evening was not Lucrezia herself, but her cousin Adriana, whose marriage to a minor Orsini nobleman had been arranged to strengthen Borgia influence in Rome. But Lucrezia, now experienced in the dark arts of matrimonial politics, had been given an unprecedented role. She would oversee the consummation ritual as the papal representative, ensuring that every requirement was met and every detail properly documented. What made this night different from any other political marriage was the innovation Lucrezia brought to the process. Drawing from her own traumatic experiences with witnessed consummations, she had developed a new protocol that would guarantee the legitimacy of the union beyond any possible challenge. Instead of the traditional single consummation with minimal witnesses, she mandated 3 separate acts of intimacy, each with different observers and each recorded by separate scribes. The first consummation would be witnessed by representatives of the church, ensuring religious legitimacy. The second would be observed by secular nobles, providing political validation. The third would be documented by foreign diplomats, making the union internationally recognized. It was a system so thorough, so strategically brilliant, that it would become the template for high-level political marriages across Europe for the next 2 centuries. As the clock struck midnight, the first phase began. The bride, trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation, was led to chambers that had been transformed into something between a cathedral and a courtroom. Crimson silk draped from the walls, while gold candelabras cast dancing shadows across marble floors. The bed itself had been elevated on a platform, making it visible to the carefully positioned witnesses who sat in alcoves around the room, their faces hidden in shadow but their presence undeniable. The young Orsini groom, barely 18 and clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was expected of him, entered to find not just his bride, but an audience of the most powerful people in Rome. Cardinals, diplomats, and nobles who normally decided the fate of armies were now here to witness something far more intimate. The pressure was immense, but failure was not an option. Too much was at stake. Lucrezia herself sat in the place of honor, dressed in papal purple, her eyes recording every detail with the precision of a military strategist. She had learned from her own experiences that in this world, even the most private moments could be weaponized. By controlling this ritual, by perfecting it, she was ensuring that no woman would ever again face the humiliation she had endured when her first marriage was annulled due to questions about consummation. The first act played out with mechanical precision. Every movement was observed, every sound recorded. The young couple, guided by centuries of aristocratic protocol, performed their duty while scribes made careful notes about timing, position, and proof of completion. What should have been the most intimate moment of their lives had become a legal proceeding. But in the brutal world of Renaissance politics, this documentation would protect them from future challenges to their union. When the first phase concluded, there was a brief intermission during which wine was served and the bride was allowed to rest. But this was not the end. This was merely the first movement in a symphony of strategic sexuality that would continue through the night. As dawn approached, the second consummation began, this time with a different set of witnesses representing the secular nobility of Rome. The young groom, exhausted but determined, rose to the occasion once again. His bride, now more confident, played her part with a growing understanding of the power she was wielding. Every sigh, every movement was currency in the complex economy of Renaissance politics. They were not just making love, they were making history. The second act demonstrated something remarkable: the couple's ability to perform under the most extraordinary pressure. Where other noble marriages had failed due to the stress of public scrutiny, this pair succeeded by embracing the ritual rather than fighting it. They understood that their bodies had become instruments of state policy, and they wielded that power with increasing skill. As the third and final consummation began with the foreign diplomatic corps as witnesses, something unexpected happened. The mechanical performance of earlier hours had given way to something more genuine. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was the strange intimacy that comes from sharing such an intense experience. But the final act carried an emotional charge that surprised even the experienced observers. This transformation was precisely what Lucrezia had hoped to achieve. Her innovation wasn't just about creating better documentation, it was about giving couples the opportunity to move from performance to authentic connection, ensuring that political marriages had the best possible chance of becoming real partnerships. In a world where loveless unions often led to adultery, assassination, and dynasty-ending scandals, this approach offered something revolutionary: the possibility of duty and desire coexisting. When dawn broke over Rome on that October morning, more than just a marriage had been consummated. A new model of political alliance had been born, one so effective that it would reshape European diplomacy for generations. The meticulous records kept that night became more than just proof of consummation. They became a template, an instruction manual for how future marriages could be structured to maximize both political effectiveness and personal satisfaction. The ripple effects spread quickly across Italy and beyond. Within months, other noble houses were adopting variations of the Borgia protocol. The French court, always eager to copy Italian innovations in both fashion and politics, requested detailed reports of the procedures. Spanish diplomats carried news of the method back to their own royal marriages. Even the English, traditionally suspicious of continental customs, quietly began implementing similar practices in their most important dynastic unions. But the true genius of Lucrezia's innovation lay not just in its immediate political effectiveness, but in its long-term strategic implications. By creating such thorough documentation of consummation, she had made it virtually impossible for rival families to challenge the legitimacy of these unions years or even decades later. Previous political marriages had often been undermined by whispered doubts about whether they had been properly consummated, leading to annulments that could destroy carefully crafted alliances overnight. The psychological impact on the participants themselves was equally profound. The young Orsini couple emerged from their ordeal not traumatized, but transformed. They had proven themselves capable of performing under the most intense scrutiny imaginable, a skill that would serve them well in the public life they would lead as married nobles. More importantly, they had discovered that they were genuinely compatible, turning what could have been a loveless political arrangement into something approaching a real partnership. For Lucrezia herself, the success of this night marked her complete transformation from victim to architect of her own destiny. No longer the frightened girl who had been passed between powerful men like a valuable object, she had become a power broker in her own right. Her expertise in matrimonial politics made her counsel sought after by families across Europe, who wanted to ensure their own dynastic marriages succeeded. The Vatican chambers where this historic consummation took place became something of a pilgrimage site for noble families planning major marriages. The room was preserved exactly as it had been that night, with the elevated bed, the witness alcoves, and even the specific arrangements of candles and silk drapery. Future brides and grooms would come to study the setup, learning from the most successful political consummation in Renaissance history. Yet beneath all the political calculation and strategic maneuvering, something genuinely human had taken place that night. Two young people had found a way to create authentic intimacy within the most artificial of circumstances. Their marriage, which could easily have become a cold political arrangement, evolved into one of the most stable and affectionate unions of their generation. They went on to have 7 children and remained devoted to each other until death, proving that even the most calculated political arrangement could blossom into genuine love. The documentation from that night, preserved in the Vatican's secret archives, provides us with an unprecedented window into how political marriages actually functioned in Renaissance Europe. Far from the romanticized version we often see in popular culture, these were highly strategic affairs where every detail was planned and every outcome carefully orchestrated. Yet within this framework of calculation, real human emotions and connections could still flourish. The 3-phase consummation protocol developed by Lucrezia became the gold standard for important political marriages throughout Europe. French princesses marrying into Spanish royal families, German duchesses wedding Italian princes, English nobles forging alliances with Scottish clans all followed variations of the system she had pioneered. The meticulous record-keeping ensured that no union could be challenged, while the phased approach gave couples the best possible chance of developing genuine compatibility. Perhaps most remarkably, the success rate of marriages conducted using this protocol was dramatically higher than those arranged through traditional methods. While the average political marriage of the era had roughly a 50% chance of ending in annulment, adultery, or murder, unions consummated according to the Borgia method showed success rates approaching 90%. The combination of thorough documentation and the psychological bonding that came from sharing such an intense experience created partnerships that were both politically effective and personally satisfying. The influence of this single night extended far beyond the immediate participants. The diplomatic innovations pioneered in those Vatican chambers influenced treaty negotiations, trade agreements, and military alliances across the continent. The principle that important agreements should be witnessed, documented, and sealed through symbolic acts became standard practice in international relations. In many ways, our modern diplomatic protocols can trace their origins back to that revolutionary evening in Renaissance Rome. Today, nearly 5 centuries later, scholars are still uncovering new documents related to that historic consummation. Letters between participants, reports from foreign observers, and even architectural plans of the chamber setup continue to surface in archives across Europe. Each discovery adds new layers to our understanding of how political power really operated in Renaissance society and how one woman's strategic brilliance reshaped European diplomacy. The legacy of Lucrezia Borgia is innovation reminds us that history's most significant moments often took place not on battlefields or in throne rooms, but in the intimate spaces where human connection and political calculation intersected. Her ability to transform vulnerability into strength, to turn the bedroom into a boardroom, and to create lasting alliances through the strategic deployment of sexuality marks her as one of the most innovative political minds of her generation. The secrets hidden in Europe as archives reveal a world where power operated according to rules we can barely imagine today, where a single night of witnessed intimacy could determine the fate of nations, where women like Lucrezia Borgia refused to be victims and instead became the architects of their own destiny. These are the stories that textbooks don't tell, the truths that were too scandalous for official histories, but which shaped the world we live in today. If this journey into history's most forbidden chambers has shown you how much we still don't know about the past, then you're ready for what comes next. Hidden in dusty archives across Europe are thousands of similar secrets waiting to be uncovered. Queens who rewrote the rules of succession through bedroom politics, duchesses who prevented wars through strategic seduction, courtesans who brought down empires through the careful deployment of desire. The past is far more fascinating and far more scandalous than anyone has dared to tell you.